Good morning.
Good morning.
Please feel free to shift around a bit if it's easier to see or more comfortable. If you appreciate the wonderful melody of Julian's breathing during Zazen, I want you to go like this with your finger and turn to Julian. It's such a gift to have this, what I imagine is warm breath. So you all surprised me. I thought, snow and Eugene usually doesn't go together. Usually people wake up and they see 2 or 3 snowflakes and they're like, okay, down for the whole day. So I'm glad that you're here. My apologies to anyone who is a school teacher because you were hoping it would be tomorrow. I know this because I was a school teacher for a long time, and also our oldest daughter is a school teacher, and this is just the time of year which you're just begging for a snow day. And then when it snows, oh, is it okay?
It starts to smell in the wee hours.
All right, we keep the hope alive. It's a funny thing. I know some of the students here, some of the residents, things that grow up in Montana, and they're just like, "What are you doing? What did Esho? What did you say? Does it have to be -20?
It has to be below 0 to be inside at recess.
Yeah. How about the stop school?
Stop school, I don't know.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Below 0. And that's Fahrenheit. I'm pretty sure she's speaking in Fahrenheit there. So that's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. Anyway, blessings to the children, everyone. So I'd like to talk this morning a little bit about light. And I was thinking this morning, one of the things that's so wonderful about snow is how everything is so bright. And I'm always hesitant to walk on the snow. You open your door, come out. I was sleeping in my office last night because we had a retreat for the past few days. A handful of us have been sitting here in meditation, and there's this beautiful white light over everything, and just that moment you think, can I walk on it? Then you have to go to the restroom or something happens and you walk on it a little bit. And in my case, this morning, I went across the street and grabbed my grandson, Kai, who's 1.5 years, because I wanted to play in the snow with him, which I had never done before. And we came over, and then pretty soon the whole yard, we're just trampling it, no problem at all. having a good time playing in the snow. I like to think of it as also playing in the light. Light is so important in many spiritual traditions, and Buddhism is no exception. But I would say that the term light in Buddhism can be very confusing. It's used in many, many different ways. Sometimes light refers to what we're used to meaning light, something like a spiritual resonance or wisdom or compassion is referred to as light. And in that case, darkness is usually seen as ignorance, seen as the opposite of compassion and wisdom. But also in Buddhism, particularly in Zen Buddhism, light is oftentimes also used to refer to the situation in which you can see things. So light is used to talk about differentiated reality. So if you think about that, when the lights are on, it's easy to pick each other out, whether we're a human being or another animate being or inanimate being, right? You can say, oh, there's a tree, there's a bird, there's my friend. Right? That's the situation of light. And darkness in that situation is not a kind of absence of wisdom or some kind of negative word, but darkness means the incapacity to pick things out. So it references the unity of things. Mm-hmm. So in the dark, you turn off all the lights and it's like, whoa, wait a minute, it becomes a little less clear. If we're just talking about sight, we would use those words. But if we think about all of our senses, the eyes, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, we can take that metaphor of sight and stretch it out over top of all of those things. In a situation where there's sound, we can differentiate. In silence, there's just the oneness of things. And again, I'll remind you, sometimes light means wisdom, compassion, all the good, groovy, spiritual stuff. And sometimes, in that case, darkness is like all the difficult, ignorant, unwise, and uncompassionate things. Right? So, confusing. It's good that it's confusing. And let me tell you why. It's good that it's confusing because we have this nasty habit of taking explanations over things directly. We would rather have an explanation. If you say, well, just tell me what light means, and then I could think about what light means rather than thinking about light. And what I want to encourage you to do is not think about what light means, but to consider light directly, to think about light and let it grow in your own spiritual heart, to encompass many different facets. Just like anything that you really come to understand, it's not a matter of being able to explain it in a kind of very rigid way, but it is the things you really understand or the things you really know well probably have to be expressed in a poem or a song to really be expressed. And then there's many facets that are present. In fact, light is oftentimes presented in a teaching as being referred to as a jewel or a mirror. You know, this is one of the reasons that there's a mirror here on our altar is light. Someone gave me a little jewel. Those of you who know Yoan, Rose, Yusei, Rose, who moved back to New York a few years ago, right after our daughter Satsuki passed away, she gave me this, it's about this big. I think it's a kind of quartz, I'm not sure. And she had a friend who would cut these stones. And a friend had cut this in a very, like if you were watching a cartoon and there was a big diamond, you know the shape I'm talking about? That's that shape. And it's amazing. If you look at it, it's perfectly clear. And if you look at it, it's like looking into a magical world. It's like everything comes through that jewel in a miraculous play of light. So sometimes light a jewel, sometimes a mirror, sometimes light as the ungraspable, sometimes light emitted from a Buddha's tuft of hair in the middle of their forehead. Shakyamuni in the Lotus Sutra Assembly, which I was thinking about this morning when I was planning on reading this again from the Lotus Sutra. I think I've read this at least 5 times this year so far. And I'm going to read it again. I debated, but I thought the more you hear this, the better, especially if I'm going to keep going on about light. So this happens early in the Lotus Sutra, and the Buddha is taken his place on Vulture Peak, and there's a great assembly that has gathered around him. Sitting cross-legged, the Buddha entered the state of concentration called the place of innumerable meanings, in which his body and mind were completely motionless. Then Mandarava, great Mandarava, Manjushaka, and great Manjushaka flowers rained down from the sky on the Buddha, and the entire assembly, while the whole Buddha world trembled and shook in 6 ways. Then the whole congregation, monks and nuns, laymen and laywomen, gods, dragons, satyrs, centaurs, asuras, griffins, chimeras, pythons, humans and non-humans, as well as minor kings and the wheel-turning saintly kings, astonished because this had never happened before, with palms together and with complete attention, joyously looked up at the Buddha. From the tuft of white hair between the eyebrows, one of his characteristic features, the Buddha emitted a beam of light, illuminating 18,000 worlds in the east, so that there was nowhere that it did not reach, down to the lowest purgatory and up to the highest heaven. In those worlds, all the living beings and the six states could be seen. Likewise, the Buddhas existing at present in those lands could be seen, and the sutra teaching those Buddhas were preaching could be heard. Monks and nuns, laymen and laywomen who had attained the way through the practice could also be seen. Further, one could see bodhisattvas, the great ones, walking the bodhisattva way due to various causes and conditions, with various degrees of faith and understanding, and in various forms. Likewise, Buddhas who had entered complete nirvana could be seen, and one could see their stupas made of the 7 precious materials, stupas that had been built to hold the remains of these Buddhas after they had entered complete nirvana. Perhaps the most famous scene at least in Japanese Buddhism, comes from sutra. Shakyamuni Buddha. Great assembly of beings. All of them gathered around, and the Buddha is meeting them with the total clarity of a Buddha's awakening. And this light appears. And because of that light, beings throughout all worlds can be seen. And the beings of those worlds that have woken up, their preaching can be heard. And all of the people who are following the way can be seen. And the stupas of the Buddhas of those worlds that have passed into complete nirvana can be seen. In fact, all beings in those worlds can be seen. And I mentioned many times how I feel it's very important that in this rendition from the Lotus Sutra, the iconography that's made from it, or the paintings that are made from it, that usually the Buddha is to one side, and then the Buddha illuminates to the east. This is very different than a mandala, where the Buddha is sitting in the center, and then everything's radiating out. We have that too, okay? That also exists. But in this particular one, I like to emphasize how the Buddha is illuminating the east. It's like a meeting. It's not like the Buddha is the center and everything else is around the Buddha. The Buddha is meeting all the beings of those worlds. Light is being revealed through the meeting. Now, Shakyamuni Buddha is said to have given rise to the thought of awakening underneath a Buddha named Dipankara. Dipankara means something like burning lamp. So any Buddha that we think about, we could talk about what is their origin and their stories of the origins of these Buddhas. Shakyamuni Buddha told many stories about his past lives. And it's very, very early story about giving rise to the thought of awakening on meeting Dipankara Buddha. And it's very interesting. I won't tell the whole story, but the Buddha Shakyamuni, right, countless lifetimes before becoming the Buddha, was seen as a Buddha by Dipankara Buddha. Burning light. This burning light saw the Buddhahood of Shakyamuni before Shakyamuni even knew anything about being a Buddha. Dipankara Buddha could see it. He could see the light. He could see the jewel of this being. And he gave a prediction of that being's Buddhahood that later became Shakyamuni Buddha. Dipankara Buddha was the student of Wonderful Light Bodhisattva. Burning Lamp Buddha was the disciple of Wonderful Light Bodhisattva, who was the disciple of Sun and Moon Light Buddha. So you can read about this. I encourage you to, if you like reading, read the Lotus Sutra. It's a good thing to read. But this story is outlined there. Today I'm just giving you a sketch to see how this light that the Buddha is emitting is not something that the Buddha owns. It's not something that a Buddha has and other beings do not have, right? This light is the jewel of all beings. And Shakyamuni Buddha came to enter the path of uncovering that jewel when he met Dipankara Buddha. Dipankara Buddha studied that under Wonderful Light Bodhisattva. And it's said that Dipankara was the youngest of 8 children, of the last of 20,000 sun and moonlight Tathagatas. So this sun and moonlight Tathagata, there are 20,000 with exactly the same name. They lived over and over and over again. I did the math on that. 20,000, if you think about our sun and moon, it's just a little under 60 years. Right? So those of you that are there or past that, you're probably onto the Wonderful Light Bodhisattva stage. Now I want you to notice the sun and moonlight Tathagata that is like this eternal Buddha of the sun and the moon. This isn't referring to light just in one direction. Last week in the question and response, there was some a discussion about light and how in some attitudes that we might have spiritually, we grasp onto a really unhealthy relationship with light. We think light is like the truth and I know it and I'm going to inflict it upon. Right? Some kind of quality of that. Notice here that this light is not just the sun Tathagata, not just the sun Buddha. It's the sun and the moon Buddha, the sun and the moonlight Buddha. Because sometimes light is light in the light, and sometimes light is light in the darkness. And the moon is equally important to the sun. And the light that we know in the revelation of things, in the things laid out that we can see and touch and describe and know, right? That's one kind of light. But there's another kind of light in the place where we can't know things, where we can't pick them out, where we can't be so righteous, right? And a lot of spirituality has relished that side to the witches. Well, please come back. Witches, we need you. So this is a great medicine to think about things in this way. Not to let the light split the world into two, into good and bad, into right and wrong, and et cetera, et cetera. And this is also the basis of why light is thought of as a medicine, this non-splitting. We're in the habit of investing in an externalized world. We invest the light in objects of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking. That would be the classical way of talking about it. All of those faculties of our being, they take objects. So if we look and we see something, my favorite culprit here, the glass. You see the glass? In one way we can say the glass is simply light, which you're in the process of concretizing as an object. I don't mean to say there's nothing here. Right now I'm not going to say that. Right? But keeping you on your toes. Right? But there is a process that's happening there. And in a way, we externalize the light into a world. We're very addicted to this externalization, to the extent that we start to treat these footprints in the snow, this light, this assembly of all kinds of shards of luminescence, we start to treat it as a object of my subject. As I can externalize it, then I can say, oh, it is a thing. I am the subject, right? I'm the main actor in this sitcom. Maybe your life is more of a movie or a drama or something like that. Whatever it is fine. But you're the main person, right? And then all of these things are there to support you. It's funny when we regard the world in this way, it tends to go very flat. It gets opaque. As we objectify things, they lose their luminosity. And we lose our luminosity too, right? It's not just something we inflict. It's in that process. It goes flat. I go dark. In Chinese Buddhism, ignorance is translated from the Sanskrit as, in the Japanese pronunciation is mumyo. Mu means no, and myo means to shine. So no shining. That's a way to say ignorance. Now, the Buddha described in the very first sermons about the four truths of the noble. And we usually say the Four Noble Truths. I've been spinning it around lately a little bit because it's a kind of funny translation. They're supposed to be the truths of the noble. They're supposed to be the truths of spiritual seekers, right? So that the truths themselves are noble, although I think that's fine too. The truths are noble, but they're supposed to be the truths of the noble ones, those who are seeking the path of liberation. So the Buddha says we suffer. There's dukkha, translated as suffering, sometimes translated as unsatisfactoriness. There's all kinds of translations of it, but it's basically this darkness that I'm talking about, a kind of flatness, a kind of way where nothing can scratch the itch. And that can happen in very, sometimes it feels very tragic and it's very painful, and other times it's just a nagging kind of feeling that keeps us churning along. So in the noble, the Four Truths of the Noble, the Buddha said that dukkha has a cause. Right? And in his first sermon, he said the cause is craving. In his next sermon, he said the cause is that we cling to a self. There's all kinds of ways to talk about what this essential problem of ignorance is. Right? But because we're talking about light, we can think about it as opaque or going dark. Now, the kind of clinging that we do, the kind of clinging to the subject and the object that is so much part of our normal experience, I want to warn you about thinking about it just as emotional clinging. Like, it's not just our emotional inability to let go of something. I think we're oftentimes telling ourselves that in meditation. Like, you're sitting and there's something really painful, or something just, it could be also something just annoying, or you see the kind of rigidity of your mind or your body, your breath, and you think, oh, if I could just let go, right? If I could just let go, then it would be okay. Now, that's all right. We should work there. But what I want to point here to something that is even more foundational than that. The clinging or the ignorance that the Buddha was talking about was not just when we've got ourselves tied up in knots. It's the very basis of how we objectify the world, how we're seeing moment to moment, even when we think things are going pretty good. Even when we think things are going pretty good, at the very basis of how we see things, we're buying into this externalized object. We're buying into the idea that light is out there as things, and I am here as the actor. Now, Zazen is medicine for this. And if you sit and you let things quiet down a bit, it isn't difficult to appreciate things. It becomes easier to appreciate things. There's a kind of space. Just let yourself calm down. When you hear a bird or a child playing in the snow, whatever it is, and you know that that thing isn't outside of you in a very direct way. You know it's not out there. It's not also in here either, right? There's a famous story of a Zen adept who's studying really hard, and he comes to his teacher and he says, the whole world is one. The whole world is inside my head. And he says, "Whoa, wow, you must have a really heavy head. Don't go swimming. You'll sink to the bottom." So the point there is not to think of like in a material way that everything is in your head, but the point is that we can just feel quite directly that there's not the separation, that jewel of light in which all things are refracted through. It's right here. And that refraction is simply true as my consciousness. Now, while that medicine is straightforward, we also bring into the practice of Zazen our very common way of treating everything, which is to treat it as an object, or to treat our experience as an object. So Zazen is the medicine, but we also treat it in a similar fashion to the way we treat everything else. And in that way, we try to leverage it, right? So we're sitting and there's something that we don't like, and we say, oh, if I could just breathe a little deeper, it would go away, right? Or if I could just do this, or if I could just do that, then that would be the ticket to getting past something, to getting what I want, really. Now, I'm bringing this up because it's one of the reasons I think the teachings about light is so important. You don't have to go around looking for this stuff. It's not far away. When we brutalize our own heart and mind, and we call it spiritual discipline, you can tell that's what you're doing because your heart will become dismissive. It will say, oh, no, not that. That's not important. Oh, no, that's not important. Oh, no, that's not important. And this is just exactly the opposite of what the Buddha did, or what Buddhas do, to illuminate all the way down to the deepest. This translator says purgatories. I'm not sure why it doesn't want to just say hell, but I prefer the word hell. Heck, I'm going to go on a tangent here. My teacher once told me, he said, you know what the problem with modern Buddhism is? People don't talk about hell enough. And I was like, oh, master, that's a pretty intense thing to say. What do you mean? He said, look, we're all like just running around doing crazy stuff all the time, and our lives are on fire, and no one will talk about hell. Like, that's a problem. I was like, okay, duly noted. And I moved back to the U.S. and I found out. I gave a hell talk once. I was up at Great Vow Zen Monastery, and it was during Rohatsu Sesshin. I gave this hell talk. And then the next morning, Hogan said, thanks a lot, Ejo. You just set off like half of my assembly. They're all coming into Sanzen because they're like, been in a Christian faith that really like imprinted them in an unhealthy way about hell and everything. Anyway, sidebar. Sidebar. But the Buddha illuminates hell, right? Totally and completely. It's all part of the deal. The light doesn't stop at purgatory or wherever. The light goes all the way down and through everything. This is the quality of the Buddha's compassion, right? And this should also be the quality of Zazen. And I don't mean you should force yourself to do that. I mean, this is the truth of your own heart. And you have a very clear access to it. Although that access is usually it's usually riddled with pain, because the places where life has been difficult and is painful, they're gathered around that light, and so you're going to come up against them, and that's important. It doesn't mean that Buddhism is negative. It doesn't mean that it's all about sorrow. But if you're leaving sorrow out, then your light is definitely one-sided. And so this image of the Buddha illuminating, that's gifted to us through the Lotus Sutra, this light that is itself the entire world. It's not just illuminating the world. As I've said many times before, Dogen's commentary on this, Dogen Zenji, the founder of the school of Buddhism in Japan, his commentary on this, he said it's not like a white silk being unfurled from the Buddha's brow. And I love that image, right? How could he imagine what a light shining out from someplace would be in a time where there weren't even lighthouses, right? When I say not even lighthouses are amazing, but those wicks, if you've been to the lighthouses on the coast here, those wicks that burn, and the massive lenses that they were made in France and imported here, the glassmakers in France, to be able to bring the light together so that it could shine somewhere. In 13th century Japan, light doesn't shine somewhere, it just shines, right? But people hear a story like this and they think it's like, oh, the light is coming out of the Buddha and shining on things in the East. And he says, no, it's not like that. It's not like some white silk that gets unfurled and lays on top of everyone. Not like a light that's in the Buddha, but it's not in things. In fact, he says, illuminating the East is the East's illumination. It's kind of, you have to hear that a bunch of times and you go, what? Okay, I heard there's a bunch of Easts and illuminations, right? So illuminating the East, that's what the Buddha does. The Buddha's illumination of the East is the East's illumination, or is the East illuminating, right? The East illuminates. That's what we call the Buddha's illumination. And the Buddha is revealing this. This is Dogen's kind of comment on Komyo, or on the spiritual light. Zen ancestor Changsha said the entire world in the 10 directions is a seeker's single eye. Make thy eye one. Some of you may be familiar with. The entire world in the 10 directions is a seeker's single eye. So I'd like to encourage you that this eye of seeing that is your everyday awareness. I don't mean a rarefied awareness that you have to pick away from other things, but your direct care for. Think about the attitude of care that awareness can have. Your direct care for what it is that you experience. There is a medicine in this. And it's not just a medicine of kind of like tiding you along, get you through the difficult stuff because you can calm down a little bit. Although it will do that. There's a deeper prize there that it will allow you to see more deeply into things. And as you see more deeply into them, the luminosity becomes apparent. Now, it's true, mostly what I've been talking about is the way that we objectify an externalized world, like outside of our skin bag. But we're also in the habit of this externalization internally. So we make our internal also external by identifying it and objectifying it. That's exactly what we do when we have an emotion and we say, "Eeh," or, "Oh yeah, this is the one I wanted." We work with ourselves in that same divided way. And notice, once you regard your emotions as thing to accept or to discard, then you've already externalized self. And there is another you in back. There's what's the guy's name? Wizard of Oz. Yeah, right? Is back there pulling the levers. And so that's something that it's not only externally, but also internally. In fact, the observer themselves is not to be objectified. The observer themselves is not stable, is not graspable, is also light. There's no place to stand, as the Prajnaparamita Sutras remind us over and over. But that no place to stand is enlivening. It's centering. It's freeing. When we let the light shine. And so I would say, if we want to talk about Zazen, particularly Zazen as a medicine, it can't be about folding up our legs, although folding up our legs shouldn't be left out. Zazen is the sun and the moon. And I don't mean this in just some kind of woo-woo, sort of confusing Zen thing to say. I mean very directly, when you say, what is this life? Not just mine, but all of the movements of this world and other worlds. In what way do I care? And what offering will I make of my intention? That is a matter of the sun and the moon. And you have light. You are light. And I encourage you to care for it. Time for one or two questions.
You were talking about how you externalize emotions inside of you. I was wondering if you could talk about how that relates to like the physical body as well.
Yeah. So I would say, first of all, emotionality is physical, as well as other layers. Sometimes we talk about the emotional body, which is completely pressed up against the physical body. And if you think about the way that we work with emotion when we feel it, like, so for example, if you're feeling nervous, you might feel a kind of energy that's rising in the chest. A lot of people feel that, not everybody. We call it butterflies. And so in that physical experience, the body will harden against it if we treat it with the attitude of, of kind of repulsion. And so part of a way to work with butterflies, for example, is to find a place. I'm remembering when I pretended to be part of the theater in high school. I was just so nervous that I had to go on. I like acting, as you can tell, but I don't like remembering lines. And so I'm kind of remembering that right now, and dreams I've had about it since, when you're supposed to go on and you don't know your lines, and you're nervous, and it's all coming up here. So if you stop and you feel your feet on the ground, and then as you breathe out, what you try not to do is just to push the butterflies down. They're much stronger than that. But you feel the entirety of your chest, and then you feel around the sides and in the back as you breathe. And then you feel the bottom of your feet again, and you see what the relationship between the two are. So that's in case of nervousness where there's a lot of rising energy, that would be thing. And there's a lot of emotions that are rising energy that also are physical. Anger tends to be arising, not for everybody. Some people, anger is like it goes like that, but for a lot of people, anger comes up and then it wants to come out. So that same basic process can work for that as well. I would say for every quality of emotion, how it is embodied is part of what we study in a life of meditation. We are becoming more and more subtly aware of our own being and what it is that we can do to care for all of those different layers of this being. Because this being is a reflection of all other beings, that's medicine isn't just for ourselves, it's a medicine for other beings as well. Hi.
When you're talking about that experience of feeling our body and experiencing it at that level, even that feels like a turning outward of the experience. When we bring our attention to it in that way, and it feels like there's like a line to walk where you're wholly engaging in it without externalizing it. And but I feel like I'm just imagining it. Like it's just like a thing that I can you say more to that?
Yeah. So if we go back to the glass, so where is it?
Looks like it's there.
So your point?
Yeah.
So that's part of the process
Yeah.
that's happening. So if you don't pay attention to the thing that looks like it's there, you never realize that it's not only there. And the same thing's true with our emotional body, that if we don't pay attention to it as if it's there, we'll never wake up to how it's not there, which doesn't mean that it's not real. It means that it's much more real than I had imagined. I thought it was an object of my awareness, and now I know that it is my seeing itself. And so I think you're very keen in your question. There is a lot of our practice where we say, well, just be with it, just let things be as they are, just be with it. And that can be a very stagnating attitude. It's not about just being with it. It's about something more subtle than that. Although sometimes all we can do is just be with it. Sometimes it's like, okay, one more breath and I just have to be the breath or I'm going to run away screaming. Or sometimes I already ran away screaming and I'm weeping in a corner. And not to be too dark, but and that's the place where I'm like, oh yeah, actually I can't escape this. Running away from it's just inviting the dog to chase down my heels. And then I turn and I say, oh, okay, this thing is not other than me. And yet there's something I can meet. So one of the issues within I'd say particularly Zen Buddhism is there's a tendency to collapse things into the ultimate. And it's a big problem because people go around cutting off all parts of themselves in the service of this idea of the ultimate. If I could say anything of what I can't, what are the words? If I were to say anything about the ultimate, I would say, yeah, running away screaming and crumpled up crying in the corner is probably better to talk about than some ultimate stability. Anyway, I don't know what I'm talking about now. Other than just to say, the non-externalization doesn't mean nothing will appear external. It's just what do we do with what appears external, which is the medicine for, or can be the medicine for how it is that we then engage the world.
Done through like a constant remeeting of it, like soon as it becomes external, like how do I, like,
Yeah.
even in the bringing it back, it's just like
Yeah. Actually, a true spiritual path will take you to the end of your own power. It will take you to the edge of what you're able to do. And at that edge of where you are no longer able to do to make things better, then the light will appear in a different way.
You mentioned the piece of quartz that you're looking at and
Yeah.
how you could see everything in
Mhm.
it. When you're talking about the jewel of an individual being or thing, is that the idea or is there more to it?
Both. That is the idea, and there's more to it. And so what resonates with you in the truth of that image, I would encourage you to really treasure, and it will grow and reveal more things to you as you can. I used to hate the word symbol. I promise I won't go on forever about this, but it's a little technical. I hated the word symbol because usually when people use the word symbol, they mean like, I'm going to use a symbol for some other thing that you could know what it is. Like if we go back to our friend the glass, I could just write GLASS, and glass then becomes a symbol for this glass, like that way of symbol. And I get so frustrated with that because it's like the thing itself is true, right? But then what I found out is that's not really what a symbol is. A symbol is something that symbolizes what cannot be known otherwise. It's not like there is the thing that the jewel really represents, that you could go and figure out and explain and see, and then the jewel symbolizes it. It's that the symbol, the jewel is showing up to you as a symbol of what can't be grasped by the mind. And because it can't be grasped by the mind, it's free to show up as a jewel. So if you pay attention to the jewel, then it will teach you about this thing which is beyond the mind or heart's ability to grasp. And that's where all of the stories, that's where all the iconography, that's where all of the wonderful flow of Dharma nectar that comes to us, that's what it's all about. And make sure to come to our head student Shanae's talks, because I'm quite sure she will illuminate this jewel much more broadly.